This is Neurodivergent Faith, a podcast exploring the sacred beauty and honest challenges at the intersection of neurodivergence and Christian faith. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself, or a friend, family member, ministry leader, or seeker hoping to understand more, you're in the right place. Here we speak plainly about mental health and spirituality. We name the stereotypes and misunderstandings that still show up in our churches. We ask hard questions and resist pat answers. We listen to the lived experiences of neurodivergent Christians. Here we learn and grow together. Your host, Josh Davis, is autistic, ADHD, a spiritual director, and an ordained pastor. Josh invites you into honest conversations about the unique ways neurodivergent people encounter God through scripture, worship, special interests, attention, and communication differences, and so much more. So take a deep breath. You are welcome here, just as you are.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurodivergent Faith. This is a space where our whole selves are welcome, where questions are holy, and where the messy, miraculous work of being human meets the mystery of God. And today, I am excited because we're going to engage in a conversation about Tourette Syndrome. And I believe you're going to hear strength, you will hear truth, and you will hear how the fruit of the Spirit grows even in unexpected soil. So I'm excited today to be joined by my friend, Joy Martin. Joy, thanks so much for being here and having this conversation with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Before we get started, is there anything that you would like to share with the people about yourself? It could be what you do, where you live, or it could be something like you really enjoy or something you really can't stand. We'll take any information you'd like to share about yourself before we get started.
Whoa, nothing like a blank canvas of all the things. So something I can't stand is mayonnaise or food that has a sound when you stir it, like tuna salad or chicken salad. Mm-hmm. Something I love is cotton candy. I consider it one of my love languages. It's like the seventh one because emails is number 6 for me. So I manage people and processes in my daily life. That's what I get paid for, is people and process development. And I have lived in Georgia now for a little over a year, and feels like such a gift to be able to be in community with people I've only known from afar previously.
I am glad, for one, to have you nearby and to get to see you face to face here and there. It's really lovely to run into you. Today we're talking about Tourette Syndrome. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with Tourette Syndrome, and when did you first become aware of your tics, for example?
It's interesting. I guess I probably have always had tics. And I think I noted them, but didn't note them as something to be aware of or difference. And about just realizing it's actually only a little over 10 years ago. I remember sitting on my parents' porch and one of my sisters said, and I don't recall, it's not, pretty sure it was out of the blue. They said, "Do you think you have Tourette's?" I remember being so surprised, like, what are you talking about? And so they kind of continued to tell me what they were seeing. I come from a large family, and there was less of a desire to stand out and be unique and more to kind of be one of the many. Mm-hmm. And so it felt really like, I honestly felt like in one of those movies where you just like spiral, and whether it's like a tornado or if you've seen the movie Inside Out, when he goes to like the dark place, he drinks the tea, like that is the way it felt. So I have 2 uncles on my dad's side with Tourette's, and they have a verbal tic as well as some like physical ones. And so I was aware of Tourette's, but always in an other and never in a label that kind of I identified with or thought connected. And so I did a little research. I will tell you, for my Tourette's, I did a ton of denial and try to figure it out and try and control it. But I did learn that you have to see a therapist for at least a year before you can be diagnosed. And at that time, I had been seeing a therapist for other reasons. And So I was like, you know what? Let me ask my therapist. And I remember sitting on the couch and just saying, hey, you know what? Towards the end of the session, just said, hey, just kind of a question for you. Do you think I have Tourette's? And he, without hesitation, was like, yes. I was kind of expecting him to like dance around the topic or, you know, tell me how it makes you feel. Why do you care about this?
Let's explore it for the next 2 months and find.
Exactly. Let's dive deeper into what that means. And so I tried to like fight off tears and asked, you know, is there medication and, you know, or things? And he said, before we could even consider meditation, like, you know, we'd have to talk kind of like coping mechanisms and some other things that you could try. I remember talking with a girlfriend kind of after that, because the label of Tourette's, honestly, I remember saying that it felt like a nail in the coffin. Some other kind of really challenging emotional life stuff had happened within kind of that last year or two. And I was really wrestling with trying to become the person I was raised to be, come from a conservative background, very religiously conservative. And so, you know, the good girl, there were certain requirements of who you were to become and what your life was supposed to look at. And Tourette's was not in the list at all. And so, you know, talking through and processing it, you know, my friend asked, why does it feel like a nail in the coffin? Why is it kind of so bad? And I think, again, it just felt like one more thing I couldn't control or couldn't fix. And that felt just really painful and challenging to me. And so learning to live with it. And because once you know something, or at least the way I'm wired, once you know something, you can't unknow it. So suddenly it felt like everything, I like couldn't see anything but it. I couldn't watch videos of myself without seeing it. I, you know, sang in a choir or worship team, and I would watch back videos of myself and just feel like it was so glaringly obvious. And to me, it felt like, again, something to be fixed. When COVID time hit, one of my tics is kind of an unproductive cough. So people love to offer me cough drops. And sometimes when I'm feeling extra spicy, I'll tell them a cough drop can't cure my neurological condition, but thanks anyway. And so I'd be in like grocery stores and, you know, or on a plane because I traveled a little bit in 2020 and 2021. And even with a mask, knowing like, you know, you're already nervous and doing all that stuff. So I'd just be sitting in line, kind of continuously coughing and not be able to stop it. And so I got many stares and many people asking me if I had COVID or, you know, moving away from me, which feels like the worst thing when someone like puts distance between themselves and me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like the major focus and I had a space where I couldn't look away from it. I would stand, I remember getting out of the shower and like standing in front of the mirror and like my body just checking and me like beating on my body, trying to like stop it. Trying to, just be still and not being able to be still felt like torture. And felt like, a lot to navigate. So fortunately, after a few years, I feel like I'm finally in the acceptance, and this is part of my story, not the only part. And so I bring it up more often. I probably don't need to, but there's a part of me, you know, if you say it first or call it out, then you can disarm it, but also it helps, I feel like, inform the people I'm around. So they understand kind of the on-ramp, even at work. You know, if I'll be in certain meetings or feel like it's appropriate, sometimes I'll say something about it to, again, kind of, to me, it feels like the elephant in the room. Though I have found other people don't notice it like I do, which is, you know, kind of the quintessential having things in your own head. And so you can only see your own story and your own experience. and you assume it's on, someone's there with a bullhorn, just like it feels like to you. And so it's taken me a long time to accept that isn't a full truth.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We've known each other for a while, and I actually didn't pick up on anything. I never picked up on anything that I considered unusual, and it was you saying that you had Tourette's that was my first indicator. And part of that, I think, is because I had some old misconceptions about what Tourette's was. Like when I thought of Tourette's, I thought the only association I had was people screaming curse words randomly and not being able to control them, right? And
Yes.
I have not heard you do that. So I was like,
True.
Tourette's, I don't fully understand. And I did some research and realized for a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, you have to have both some sort of body tics, but also a vocal tic. But the vocal tic doesn't have to necessarily be saying words.
Yeah.
It could be that unproductive cough that you were talking about before. And I heard even in your own story, like when it was suggested to you by your sisters, do you think you have Tourette's? Like, you had to go on a research to figure out what does that even mean, and is this something that applies to me or not? And then you also had just a lot of your own, well, it sounds like stigma too around that terminology. I honor what it's taken to even just be able to have for us to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine calls, the verbal kind of calling out curse words, or there's other that isn't just curse words, but he would call it the exciting Tourette's. And so I don't have the exciting Tourette's. And I did joke that maybe I'll just randomly curse and then be like, sorry, it's my Tourette. So I could maybe blame it on it. Haven't tried it out yet. Depends on the situation. But yeah, that definitely was the stigma. And both of my uncles had a pretty extreme verbal. While theirs wasn't word, it was also a noise that was really impossible to kind of miss. And so I think that's one of the reasons I didn't feel connected to it. And I only had known men with Tourette's or boys, like only recently. I saw an interview with Billie Eilish, and she has Tourette's, and that changed my life. Like I almost cried. Well, let's be honest, it's me, so there were tears. And
almost cried that.
If there was just one tear, I call that almost because it's not sobbing uncontrollably. But I remember watching it like 3 times just in a row, and also just like looking for tics. I'm looking for what is it, what is that person? Because again, I hadn't seen it in women. And so since then, I've seen a few on social media. That's been helpful to kind of see that I'm not alone in that, and to see it less like this just is. But yeah, tons of stigmas around it and assuming that it's got to look like that or it isn't. But I don't look like that, and I am.
I like the simplicity of that statement. There's so many different directions that I'd like to go in this conversation, but one thing that came up as you were sharing your story is this idea of trying to show up in the way that was expected of you in your family growing up and trying to fit into this really constricted kind of mold. And I imagine there was a lot of suppressing that had to happen in you spiritually, emotionally. And then that made me connect to this idea of suppressing tics. Can you say more about what that's like for you? What is it like to try to suppress a tic? And then what does it cost you?
Thanks for asking. It's like half a moment.
Take your time.
Suppressing is such an interesting thing. So Tourette's or tics, and that tend to be exacerbated with when you're tired, stressed. It can be connected to diet if you're, having maybe a higher sugar diet, etc. And so those things also are adding to it. And so when I think about honestly, I'm always trying to suppress it. I'm always aware of it. And so what I have found is that the more I try to suppress, the worse it is. There are certain things like focusing on it. You can like pinch yourself and kind of focus on that pain rather than something else. So there are certain, for lack of a better term, coping things. For me, if I am focused on trying to not tic, for example, as part of a songwriting circle for quite a few years, and we would often, do rough drafts or rough takes of the songs we were writing. And the entire time I'm trying so hard to hold my breath. I'm focused on don't cough, don't do anything. Because if I hold one, then usually another one, it's going to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it was like my worst nightmare, the idea that I might have coughed. And that's probably sounds so ridiculous. Like it's just a cough. It's okay. But it's a standout for reasons that you can't control. And so, yes, when I'm tired or uncomfortable, I've had people close to me say, yeah, I see it more in this environment than in that. And it's because spaces where I don't feel safe, or, there's a lot of eyes on you. It's taken me a while to work through it, even in my job, going in front of, high profile clients and just learning how to find your own like peace and quietness to be able to navigate without having it get worse, because there was a season where I felt like they would just all be going at all times. And so if I focus every part of myself, my brain, etc., I just can't do anything else. I can't hear what's around me. I can't eat. I can't talk. Like the focus will literally be, I disconnect. So you're going to get like the front face of me. But I can't connect to the depths because I'm trying to stop, trying to control. And so I hold my breath a lot, not intentionally. So sometimes I realize I haven't breathed. I'm like, okay, take a breath. I, kind of have that surprise breath. And then I feel really separate. I feel distanced.
Yeah.
When I think about like suppression and that, it feels like kind of mentally taking yourself out of the situation and you're suddenly in the corner. The challenge is that no one knows you're in the corner. Like no one knew you took yourself out of the group or out of the situation because you're just trying so hard to be still, to not interrupt. Like someone sharing their deepest stuff, and all you can do is just and then ticking and that stuff, and it feels again just so noticeable. And so I feel like distance and then pain. I for a while it's gotten a lot better, but they recommend that people with repetitive motion, things like Tourette's, get massages a lot. And so I tried it for a while, and I would cry during most of my massages because it's not until those moments that you realize how much pain you're in. So for the course of quite a few years, one of my biggest tics was like wrenching my neck. And so the side of my neck was like a rock. I felt like, you wake up, you have a crick in your neck. It felt like living that 24/7. And it was painful, and something that like you can't talk about without talking about your Tourette's. And Tourette's has always kind of felt like my secret shame. And so I think that's why for a long time I tried to suppress so that it wasn't as obvious. Because a lot of people with mine will just think I'm like moving to get comfortable. No, I'm moving because I can't stop. And I hate that. I want, I look at people just like sitting and being, and I think like, what must that be like to one, just to sit, to not tick, to not have to think every time you have a tick. Did you cough too loud that time? Is it going to draw attention? Are you moving too much? And now, someone's going to shush you.
Oof. Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I hear several things. I hear that to suppress costs you a lot of pain to your body. It also costs you attention. It's like takes all of your attention to suppress. It costs you presence. And I was thinking about that just even in our friendship, like how I would hate for you to feel like when we're hanging out together, you have to focus on not ticking, and then I don't actually get to be present with you, and you don't get to be present with me. And I was thinking about worship spaces, right? And even presence to God, and
Yeah.
how you often might feel like you're working so hard just to not, quote unquote, distract other people by something that you can't fully control, but you can work really hard and sacrifice the ability to connect with God and with others in those spaces. And I can resonate with that a little bit just in my own journey of masking autism specifically. When I'm masked, I'm present, but I'm not really present.
Yeah.
It's different, but I am also suppressing some of my natural tendencies, and I am trying to compensate in other ways. And that's not what I want for me. It's not what I want for you. It's not what I want for anybody in a real relationship and also in a worship setting.
Yeah, it's interesting because, even as you shared your journey and navigating through that and thinking, the reality is everybody has something, whether it's a life situation, a neurodivergent style of thought, of being. And I think one of the beautiful things of a gift like your friendship is that there's a space of like, come as you are. And so the more, someone like me can believe that's true, and lean into that, that even if there are, for a long time, it's as long as there aren't, then I can be, at peace. And even if there are, that those aren't the main things people in my life are focused on. That's what it took me a long time to accept and believe, that someone didn't only like mainly see that. And sometimes many of my friends don't even see it. And not because I haven't like let them in. It's because it's so big to me and it's just life to them. And so, yeah, in worship services and like very quiet times, that is when I'm holding my breath, and trying to like focus on that. I'm grateful when I'm in services that there's noise. I remember our community recently we had somebody who kind of did more like physical movement as our way of worship. And I was just noticing like during the whole thing that it was one of the only times I didn't hyper focus on my tics, because there was noise and there was movement. So I didn't have to be still. I didn't have to try to be silent. And so that just feels like a really beautiful thing. I'm always grateful in services when there's like music playing behind something. I'm like, oh, thank God. Like I don't have to, my cough or whatever is not going to be louder than, the atmosphere.
Background music covers a multitude of
Exactly. Like it helps the spirit move, and also it covers Joy's tics. So thank you, Lord, for that for sure.
Well, I'd like we focus some on the difficulties, and I want to give those space because that's real and that's important to me. But I also am curious on the other side, and so I'll toggle back over there for a minute and just ask, What do you think are some of the unique strengths you carry because of, not just in spite of, your experience with Tourette's? So I wanted to say a minute ago, when you were talking about how your friends don't see those things like you see them, like, that is so true for me as your friend.
Mhm.
Honestly, like, if I were to make a top 20 list of the most salient characteristics of my friend Joy, like, Tourette's would be nowhere on the top 20. But I'm also curious to hear, like, what is this, what are some of the strengths that you carry, or maybe are beginning to carry, not
Mhm.
just in spite of Tourette's, but actually because you
Mhm.
live with this experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think similar to what I said earlier, that there is a transition from denial into acceptance and being. And, until you can accept things about yourself that aren't perfect, or, might be not neurotypical, it's real difficult to accept that in others. While you could say, hey, I'm showing mercy or whatever, it's difficult to show grace that you haven't shown to yourself. One of the, I think, beautiful things that comes out of navigating personal challenges, whatever that may be. And for me, with Tourette's, is I see it. I usually there's a few things that I can see in people before others can. And I think it just allows me really to focus and be able to see people in the margins. In order to make space for me, I also make space for them, and can have a lot more like grace and understanding. So I think it's really like an open mindedness. And, I've had a lot of people in my life who are neurodivergent or have dealt with challenges. It feels really more normal to me, than an abnormal thing. And just like, this is one of the things that comes with this person. And you learn to pivot and create space. And so I would say it does that for me. And probably the thing I hate the most about it, that it requires me to stay near to the feet of Jesus. Because at no point am I able to think so highly about myself, not in a self-deprecating way, but in the space that, like, I can't believe that I'm perfect. I can't stand from a level of like hubrisness or pride, because I am still broken in need of a savior, and not to fix it. And that it's like bad. It's kind of like this full acceptance. And whatever my personality style is to fix things. And so one of the biggest things with Tourette's is knowing, like, I can't fix it. I can't stop it. I can't stop my brain from telling my body it's supposed to move and make sounds when it doesn't need to do those things. And so, yeah, being able to be open more to God, and his leading in my life, and then creating space for others definitely feels like some of the beautiful things and strengths that come out of navigating this life.
I really appreciate that. And as you're talking, one of the things I'm also hearing is, and I know this about you, is you have a keen awareness for every human that you come in contact with, that there's probably more that's happening underneath the surface. And I have a feeling, now that I'm listening to you and kind of putting two and two together in your story, I have a feeling that some of that awareness comes from you knowing that about yourself, right? That there's
Yeah.
more happening on the inside of you, that people are even aware of. And you then give other people the benefit of that doubt too, to recognize, oh, there's stuff going on underneath the surface in all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree.
That's beautiful. I like that a lot.
Thanks.
There are a lot of misunderstandings. We talked a little bit about this already. about what Tourette syndrome is, what are some myths that you often encounter? And what truths would you want to gently correct? Or not so gently. You don't have to be gentle about it.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. One, they're not all the same. Not everybody has exciting Tourette's, where they curse randomly. That, like most things in life, most people just want to be considered. I know you say this, all the time. Like if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Right.
And so I think that could be carried to a lot of things, that if you've met one person, you've met one person. Great. Good job. And, the whole controllable thing about it, that they aren't controllable. They aren't things that we do to be, for attention. It's not a behavioral, we're just hyper, fill in the blank. So I think a lot of those things tend to be big focuses. Just like we, live in a society where it's like you're supposed to sit still and learn a certain way, be a certain way. And it's just a good reminder that that's not the case. Like I said, I can try to control my tics. I can try to keep quiet. But something is going to be sacrificed if that is the case. And it's only sacrificed temporarily. Like you can only control temporarily. So if I can hold my cough in, most likely my body is going to start ticking, my neck, or I blink my eyes 1 million times. So whether that's that, or, I start to do this jump in my midsection. And so it's coming out some way. My body needs that. And so when you think, oh, well, it's okay, this person's quiet this time, it's probably because they're sacrificing something. I have to think about what I wear. I can't wear things that are like too tight because my body is constantly pushing to make sure it has freedom. Kind of like when you have a bruise and you keep touching it to see if it still hurts. My body naturally is like trying so hard to like, wait, are we good? Are we good? Are we safe? Let's make sure. And so you're never going to know everything going on. And so those are the things that I think I'd love for people to just consider with people in general, but especially with those of us. Just because you can't see the struggle doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, thank you for putting words to that. And for recognizing that your experience with Tourette's is different than other people's experience with Tourette's.
So much.
The more we have these kinds of conversations, I think the more we can even imagine considering one another.
Yeah.
We can't consider what we don't know exists. As I've done some research and some listening, I didn't realize that studies show that 1 in 100 to 150 people have Tourette's. So I didn't realize it was so prevalent. And then also up to 20% of kids will deal with tics at some point in their childhood. Now, some of them outgrow tics and it's not Tourette syndrome, but 20% of kids will have tics at some point in their childhood. And I didn't realize that. And then I've also realized that there can be a lot of overlap. Tourette syndrome will also co-occur with autism or co-occur with ADHD or OCD. And sometimes it's hard to even pull apart some of those things.
So true.
Because you have like movements like stims for autism, and then you have compulsions in OCD, and then you have tics. And they're all different. And they're different motivations, different end results, but they can look similar, and they can co-occur in the same person, which is really interesting to me too.
It's kind of funny, or funny is probably the wrong word. It's crazy that like 1 in 150, and then to think of my family line, in 2 generations, I'm fairly certain there's at least one other person in my family line who has it. There's 3 of us or 4 of us. And so,
That's something else I ran across is there is a genetic component.
Yeah.
It's still unclear how that all works. Like with a lot of the neurodivergent conditions, it's unclear what the genetic component is, but it's obvious that there is one. I want to talk a little bit about control, because as humans, we like control. And then we have in scripture the idea of self-control as a fruit of the Spirit. But then we have these things about ourselves that we can't control. For example, your tics.
Yeah.
How do you interpret the word self-control, and have you wrestled with that or reframed it? Because I can imagine Tourette's could get spiritualized, where people could say, like, well, if you just had more of the Holy Spirit, then you would be able to control XYZ, right?
Yeah.
It should be incredibly damaging and makes me angry just to think about it. But how do you interpret self-control, and how do you wrestle with that concept?
Oh, Josh, you asked the hard questions. So it's interesting you're saying like the whole over spiritualized. That's exactly my, core foundational years were very much that your faith was to heal you. And so any representation of ailment was a faith problem or a sin problem. And so whether that's asthma or you have a common cold, like there was something there. And so that is, I would still say, rooted to some degree in how I navigate things. Even I started taking antidepressants like 4 years ago, and it's actually been one of the things that has helped my neck, because a portion to that actually is for people with chronic pain. And so I've been grateful for that. But I remember even thinking about taking something, just being like, what about my faith? I am inclined to be an all or nothing person, which is why I think in the beginning it felt like a nail in the coffin. It's like, well, if I can't, control my physical tics, then I might as well not be here. And so, so I think it's continual tension in what is God really calling me to? Because I think the spirit of self-control, meaning like a submission to God versus a submission to self, is probably more of a focus. And so I can live in the I can't control this, which I did for a real long time. And like, what's wrong with me? I could live in the why me, and learning the why not me, like, who am I that I wouldn't have this or wouldn't have something, I think allows for a lot more grace. So no, I can't physically control myself, but I was never supposed to control. This is something that hasn't separated me from faith or Jesus, rather the need to rely on him, because I will spiral without him. And so being able to cling to that, I think helps me live in the this just is and is part of my testimony and my story, and not a lack of spiritual, oneness or my faith, or I don't connect those two at all, though I would like to be able to stop it, to be fair.
I hear the both and in that. I don't connect these things with my faith, but also if I had a choice, I would prefer to be able to stop ticking. Sure. I grew up with strong notions of self-control being preached pretty aggressively. And for me, it was a lot about control your attitude. And now I recognize that I cannot control my internal response to something like having an appointment cancel. That's really hard on my brain and my need for predictability. The way trust is built for me is by someone doing exactly what they said they would do.
Yes.
When an appointment cancels, which is a natural part of life, right? And it's anybody's fault necessarily. Sometimes it could be. but I have these really big internal reactions. It happened to me recently where it was like I had something cancel, and my reaction was, I'm not going to do season 2 of the podcast. I am not going to try to make another appointment with another person ever again. Like, that was the size of my internal reaction, which I used to feel so much shame over.
Yeah.
And like, that was a sign of sinfulness and my depravity. But now I see it, I recognize it and go, oh, of course it feels like that. Yeah, it makes sense. That's really unsettling. You feel like you don't want to trust anyone. I get it. And we're not going to live based on that conclusion, but we're going to let this feeling be here for a minute. And then self-control for me comes in, where it's not like controlling my initial impulse, whether that's to tick or whether that's to have this strong emotional reaction, but it's to control, what do I do about that? How do I see myself? How do I act with other people? What choices do I make as a result? Does that resonate?
Yeah, that's put very well. And I can appreciate that's our whole thing with sin, right? Take it back to Adam and Eve, that there was no sin in the question or the consideration. It's really around what do we do with what we have? If somebody cancels on me or is late, it can either be a reminder of proof of how like terrible that person is or we are, and how no one loves us, or etc. Or it can be, this is life happening and it's okay, and we're going to elevate ourselves to that. And so even when I have people, focus on or tell me about my Tourette's, is my least favorite thing. I think it's gross for me and helpful when a friend might say, like I had a friend recently say, yeah, I noticed that you tick a lot more in this situation than in that one. And what I had to choose, because initially I was like, oh, I failed. They saw my tics, they heard me, they could figure it out. Like, I'm so obvious, this is so uncomfortable. I cannot believe this. I forced that person to pay attention or whatever. I think what I shifted to was, while this person is like paying attention and knowing me, and that felt really beautiful and kind, even though uncomfortable to be known. Again, my knee-jerk response is that my Tourette's is like a secret shame that no one's supposed to figure out, but now I lead with it half the time. So I'm like, no, I'm just supposed to tell you, but then you guys are supposed to be like, no, I've never seen you tick. I know, I'm so good at this game. So being known is really beautiful, while it can also be uncomfortable.
Sure. I see the goodness in someone who tunes into you enough to recognize how you show up differently in different circumstances, and is curious and sounds like compassionate enough to say, there must be something about this one circumstance and situation that fuels more discomfort in you, or more need for your body to express yourself through tics. I feel like we could have 14 conversations. I mean, this is how it is. Last time we got together, I think we talked for 3 hours straight, and then looked at the clock and it was like, oh, it's been 3 hours. I'm thinking about our listeners today. So I've got a couple questions here I want to close with, because you're someone that I really appreciate how you speak into other people's lives. And I'd like to give you a chance to speak to a faith leader, a pastor, ministry leader, or someone just who goes to a local church and maybe is around someone who has Tourette syndrome. What would you want faith leaders or congregants to understand about living with Tourette's, and how could churches, family, friends support you or others with Tourette's with Christ-like compassion and care?
Thanks for asking that. First thing that came to my mind thinking about this is remember I was part of a large church for some years and was in a service, and the person who was teaching that day, in the middle of the message, called out this mom and her baby. Baby had been a little fussy, and, you know, in a silent auditorium, you're going to hear the baby. But the person teaching asked the greeter team to escort the mom out in the middle of the service. And I remember being enraged. And after that, I always felt tense in that person's presence. And while we all have, you know, like you're talking about, somebody cancels on you and you have an opportunity to say, what am I going to do with that? And in some scenarios, there is a requirement for a shared, I guess, like an agreement of how we're going to behave in the space.
Sure.
The question that I would ask, like leaders, is just because it's not your preference, is it wrong? And so when you consider in a faith community or, you know, a service, if you will, of, you know, taking that approach, what is the harm in creating space and consideration? Is your priority people or production? And then two, if you do want to create space for others, whether it's culture, whether it's neurodivergent type, while I know we can't address everything, but when you're in a position of leadership, I think you have the opportunity to consider at a level that other people won't. And what you choose to make space for allows space for others. And it typically doesn't take much to be kind, to be considerate, but it does take intention. You don't accidentally stumble into community and consideration. You have to consider someone. So who are you considering? Who are you making space for? And if you're not, I guess my question is, why not? What is it going to cost you to consider someone else's preference or creating a safe space for that person? Even if it means that while you're giving a message, you have to learn to tune out crying babies. Because I would never go back to a church like that if I was that mom. I would feel so humiliated. And I just think it was like unnecessary. While I understood some of the considerations, I just think it wasn't as important as that person made it out to be. And that told me that there was not space for disruption. And as a person with Tourette's who feels like she's disruptive all the time, I felt unsafe.
So much richness in what you just shared. My brain is going in so many different directions at the same time. You talked about priorities. Will we have our priority be people or production? And I'm thinking about you in those spaces. And as a faith leader, would I want you to put all your energy on suppressing your tics so that you're not able to be present in the space and not able to pay attention to God and to the others in the space? Or would I want there to be freedom for you to make noise and to move around as you need to so that you can actually have attention on God and have attention on connecting with God and connecting with those around you? That's a no-brainer for me.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people have never considered that. And I think if we're not careful as church leaders, we can spiritualize our preferences. You were talking about preferences, right? And I could just pick the verse, be still and know that I am God. And there you go. Like, this is what we do in this space is we're still and we're quiet. And that's how we know God in this space. But what that fails to recognize is who is being left out and is not welcome then in a space where that is the spiritualized norm. Yeah. Thank you for those words. As we close, what would you say to a young person? Maybe if you were to even imagine yourself in middle school or elementary school, what would you say to a young person of faith who's just beginning to navigate life with Tourette syndrome?
I'm going to preface this by saying one of the greatest gifts I think my parents gave me, well, two, coming into a family that knew Jesus. I didn't have to go searching for him. Mm. And then two, they homeschooled us. And that comes with its own, stigmas.
Sure.
But I was never, beyond teased by my siblings, I was never bullied. Mm. And many kids with Tourette's are bullied. Yeah. And so that can lead, I think, into its own faith tension. And so I'm grateful that I didn't have to deal with that. I think I probably would have known sooner that I had Tourette's if I was in a traditional school. But if I think about myself in, middle school, navigating middle school or high school things, right? The thing that feels like the biggest thing in our life often isn't. That God is still God in the story, like he's there in the space with us. And I often felt alone and distant from my family and not known. Mm-hmm. And so I think like that's one of the beautiful things, like where God, says he's close to the brokenhearted. And so like learning and navigating Tourette's often can feel like, yeah, you're broken. And so I get to know Jesus in a way that other people don't. And while in every situation, my preferences and my needs may not be able to be met, that there are still people and spaces where they will be. And so seeking out those and I guess like valuing those above societal acceptance is probably one of the biggest things and best things that can occur. Like while I might stand out in a weird way in society, that being known, like having someone who says, hey, I see it in this space and not the other one, that there are plenty of people like that. And that if we as Jesus followers will do what Jesus did, which is consider the people who are different and lean into their spaces, we can both be known and know others. And there's just no better, I think, gift and space than that.
Well said. Thank you so much, Joy, for this conversation. It's been a delight.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to close just with a blessing as we wrap things up today. May we remember that attention looks different for different bodies and minds. And may we learn to be communities that do not require suppression as the price of belonging, where compassion is louder than judgment and love makes room for every body. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us here at Neurodivergent Faith, a space where you don't have to mask or explain, where your real questions are welcome and your presence is enough. If today's episode stirred something in you, if you felt seen, challenged, or comforted, we'd love for you to share it with a friend, leave a review, or simply linger with it a little longer. You are fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image. May you know that full well.